Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So Obama's Job Summit. They should get a hold of my program, 30 million new productive jobs to rebuild U.S. infrastructure, industry, and agriculture, the program to end the economic depression. I also noticed that one of Ron Paul's commentaries on Bernanke, he added some obiter dicta. It's fine to oppose Bernanke. That's great. But then there were these obiter dicta, these extra added things saying the federal government has no role in education and health. Well, sorry, my Constitution says general welfare, the general welfare clause. It's time for American system people to realize the Constitution belongs to us. Don't cede the Constitution to the Austrians. It's the American Constitution based on the American system. And that includes the general welfare clause. And, of course, McCulloch versus Maryland says that a national bank of the Hamiltonian type is constitutional. The greatest student of the Constitution there's ever been is the great nationalist John Marshall of Virginia, one of the great founding fathers of the United States. Tremendous contributions up and down the line. McCulloch versus Maryland says, yes, the Bank of the United States is constitutional. And it's a matter of settled law. The New Deal, also, the parts of it survived, are also a matter of settled law. So the idea of tampering with that stuff, precedents from 1818 and the 1930s, is a decidedly radical and reactionary move. So remember, the problem with economic theory is we've got the leftists are dominated by British economics, Malthus, Keynes, and the rest of that. Marx, British. On the other side, we've got the Austrians and their deflationary theories. We want to go right down the middle, the American system of political economy. Governor Winthrop of Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Friedrich List, Henry Carey, Matthew Carey, Abraham Lincoln, the populists, Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal, and Kennedy. That's the American system. That's what built the United States, not this free market claptrap. And by the way, we're sick of free trade. We want to get some jobs. It's beginning to dawn on some people. You want to have jobs in the United States, 10% protective tariff across the board. No more free trade. And the Austrian critique of free trade is it's not free enough. They want no regulations, no anti-dumping, nothing to protect you. Again, the Austrian demand always comes down to let the full fury of the Depression be visited on the naked flesh of the American people for the sake of the market, and then mysteriously, magically, the invisible hand of the market will come along. Now, Pearl Harbor Day approaches, December 7th, and we've got to remember that the rather bigger war was the one in Europe, and that's the one that began on December 11th, 1941. December 11th, 1941, when Hitler declared war on the United States 4 days after Pearl Harbor. And I have a very interesting book, of course, William Shirer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. You can find this in libraries, right? It's fairly widespread. You don't have to have a very sophisticated library to have it. I would urge you to take a look at the speech given by Hitler in the Reichstag. It's the only time Hitler actually went before the Reichstag and asked for a formal declaration of war. Otherwise, he simply attacked. And this is in the this interesting book starting on page 897. Hitler in the Reichstag, December 11th, 1941. The point that I want to make about this, I'm going to give you as much in the way of excerpts as I can give you. The critique of Franklin D. Roosevelt, developed by Hitler, is the same one you will hear from so many libertarians and so-called libertarian Republicans today. And that is, first of all, that Franklin D. Roosevelt is responsible for the Japanese attack on the United States. That's what Hitler says. And that the New Deal is a failure. A couple of samples of this. Hitler says, let me speak about another world, one that is represented by a man, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who likes to chat nicely at the fireside while nations and their soldiers fight in snow and ice. Above all, the man who is primarily responsible for this war. Yes, Franklin D. Roosevelt, primarily responsible for this war. And what Hitler means is that Roosevelt encouraged the Poles to resist the Nazis. He encouraged the French to resist the Nazis, and he says, the documents we've captured clearly and shockingly reveal the extent to which one man and the powers behind him are responsible for the Second World War. Roosevelt is responsible for the Second World War, says Hitler. And then economics. Hitler says, I came to power around the same time as Roosevelt, but there the comparisons end. Hitler says, from then on, things developed in the United States and the German Reich in such a way that future generations will have no difficulty in making a definitive evaluation of two different socioeconomic theories. Germany is prosperous, but the United States is not. The big attack here is on the New Deal. Roosevelt's New Deal legislation was all wrong. There can be no doubt that a continuation of this economic policy would have undone the president in peacetime, in spite of all of his dialectical skill. In a European country, he would have been put in a court in the dock on a charge of deliberate waste of national wealth, and he would have escaped a civil court charge of criminal business methods, says Hitler. Now, the way Hitler brings these two arguments together, Roosevelt as the one mainly responsible for the outbreak of World War II and the Japanese attack, he provoked it, in effect, is this idea that there was a resistance inside the United States. The New Deal legislation was spurious. Many respected Americans also shared this view. They realized that Roosevelt was no good. The Roosevelt haters, the pro-Nazis, the pro-fascists, the Liberty League, the Lindberghs, the Axis agents, many respected Americans shared this view. A threatening opposition was growing up all around this man, which led him to think that he could save himself only by diverting public attention from his domestic policies to foreign affairs. In other words, start the Second World War to undermine the reactionary Wall Street and big business resistance to the New Deal inside the country. And he says he's got captured Polish documents which repeatedly point out that Roosevelt was fully aware of the danger that his entire economic house of cards could collapse, and that he absolutely had to divert attention to foreign policy. And of course, and I'll spare you the ranting about Roosevelt as the tool of the world Jewish conspiracy, this scurrilous nonsense from Hitler, of course, but laced all through here. But then he goes on, he doesn't like the quarantine speech of October 1937. Remember that Roosevelt was putting up a much bolder front of resistance against Hitlerism than Chamberlain and the British, who, of course, were eagerly allying with Hitler and building it up. Let's hear what William Shirer says about this. Hitler knew that his assessment of the New Deal was shared, in part at least, by the American isolationists and a considerable portion of the business community, and he sought to make the most of it. But Hitler did not know, says Shirer, that on Pearl Harbor Day, these business groups, like all others in America, had rallied to the support of their country. Well, not so fast, Shirer. That was good patriotic rhetoric, but they didn't. Not Prescott Bush, who was also part of the apparatus that put Hitler into power. Certainly not John Foster Dulles, Allen Dulles, and others who were already thinking ahead about how to turn Hitler or Germany east against the Soviets. So again, if you ask Robert Stinnett, if you ask Calamity Schlaze over there at the Council on Foreign Relations, they will sing a song about Franklin D. Roosevelt, the slanders of Roosevelt, that are remarkably similar to the line propounded by Hitler in the Reichstag requesting a declaration of war against the United States on December 11th, 1941. So we've got the 68th anniversary of that speech by Hitler. Roosevelt haters should re-examine their position in the light of these very interesting facts. And we'll see you next week here on World Crisis Radio. Take a look at Tarpley.net and get those books of mine, Surviving the Cataclysm, Obama the Postmodern Coup, and Barack H. Obama, the Unauthorized Biography.